Welcome to tonight's broadcast. The first story was submitted by a man named Mateo Salinas. Mateo grew up in Laredo, Texas, and was 24 when this happened. At the time, he was taking classes at Laredo College while working evenings at an auto parts store. He described himself as the dependable friend, the person people call when they needed a ride, help moving furniture, or someone to watch their house. But after what happened one summer weekend, Mateo said he would never house sit for anyone again. This is his story. My friend Daniel and I had known each other since middle school. His family lived in a large two-story house on the northern edge of Laredo. The neighborhood was still being developed, so several nearby lots were empty and covered with mesquite trees and tall grass. Daniel lived with his parents and younger sister. His parents were going to San Antonio for a family wedding, and Daniel was traveling with them. They planned to leave early Friday morning and return Sunday afternoon. All I had to do was feed their two dogs, bring in the mail, water a few plants, and sleep at the house both nights. Daniel didn't believe anything would happen, neither did I. The neighborhood was quiet, and the house had cameras covering the front entrance, driveway, and backyard. They also had an alarm system, but Daniel's father didn't like it activated while someone was staying there. Daniel gave me the code anyway. If you hear something, turn it on, he said, but it'll probably just be the dogs. They had two German Shepherd mix named Coco and Bear. They were big enough to make anyone think twice about entering the yard. When I arrived Friday evening, both dogs met me at the gate, wagging their tails. Everything appeared normal. I ordered food, watched TV, and spent most of the evening downstairs. At around 11, I let the dog into the backyard one last time. That was when I noticed the light inside the small storage shed was on. The shed stood against the back fence. Daniel's father kept gardening equipment and old tools inside it. I remember seeing the light off earlier, but I wasn't completely certain. I walked across the yard and tried the handle. The door was locked. There were no windows, so I couldn't see inside. I assumed Daniel's father had accidentally left the light on before the family departed. As I turned around, I noticed Bear staring towards one side of the house. His ears were raised. Come on, I told him. He ignored me. Coco returned to the back door, but Bear remained perfectly still. He was looking at the narrow passage between the house and the wooden fence. I aimed my phone's flashlight into it. There was nothing. After a few seconds, Bear followed me inside. I locked the back door and went upstairs. Daniel had told me I could sleep in his bedroom, but his bed was covered with laundry and video game equipment. His parents' room felt too private, so I chose the guest bedroom at the end of the hallway. The room was small but comfortable. It had a bed, a dresser, and a large closet with two sliding doors. Before going to sleep, I checked the windows and closed the bedroom door. Sometime after midnight, I heard the dogs moving downstairs. Their nails clicked against the tile. At first, I ignored it. Then Bear barked once. It wasn't a loud, aggressive bark. It sounded more like he had been startled. I sat up and listened. A few seconds later, he barked again. I walked into the hallway and looked downstairs. Both dogs were standing near the kitchen, staring towards the laundry room. The laundry room connected to the garage. I went downstairs and checked the door. It was closed and locked. I looked through the window facing the backyard, but it was too dark to see beyond my reflection. Everything's fine, I told the dogs. Bear continued staring at the laundry room door. I gave them treats and eventually convinced them to follow me upstairs. They settled in the hallway outside the guest bedroom. I went back to bed. Nothing else happened that night. On Saturday morning, I found one of the kitchen cabinets open. It was the cabinet where Daniel's family stored cereal, bread, and snacks. A package of tortillas had been left on the counter. I assumed I had done it and forgotten. I had eaten late the night before, and I wasn't paying much attention while cleaning up. Later that morning, I noticed something else. The garage door was partially raised. It wasn't open enough for a car to pass underneath, but there was a gap of about 2 feet between the door and the driveway. That bothered me because I remember checking the laundry room door during the night. It had been locked, but I hadn't looked inside the garage. I pressed the button on the wall and the garage door closed normally. Nothing appeared to be missing. Daniel's father's truck was gone, but several boxes and tools remained along the wall. I checked behind the vehicles and inside a small storage area. I didn't see anyone. I texted Daniel and asked if his father had been having trouble with the garage door. He replied that it sometimes reversed if something blocked the sensor. I accepted that explanation because I wanted to. That afternoon, I left the house for approximately 2 hours. I bought lunch and stopped at my apartment for clean clothes. When I returned, the dogs were sitting, waiting near the front door. Neither one barked when I entered, but they didn't greet me normally either. Both dogs immediately ran upstairs. I followed them and found them standing outside the guest bedroom. Bear was growling. He was facing the closed bedroom door. I slowly opened it. The room looked exactly as I had left it. The bed was unmade, my backpack was on the floor, and my phone charger was plugged into the wall. I checked beneath the bed. Nothing. I opened the bathroom door across the hallway. It was empty. Bear entered the bedroom but stopped near the closet. His fur stood up along his back. I walked over and pulled open the first sliding door. My clothes were hanging beside several old jackets belonging to Daniel's family. There was nothing unusual. The other side contained blankets, suitcases, and plastic storage bins. I pushed a few things aside. No one was there. I started laughing because I felt ridiculous. I thought the dogs might have smelled a mouse or another animal inside the wall. That evening, I made sure every door and window was locked. I also activated the alarm system. Just after 10, I received a notification from one of the cameras outside. Motion detected in the backyard. The video showed Bear and Coco walking across the patio. Behind them, the light inside the shed was still on. I watched the recording twice. For a moment, I thought I saw the shed door move, but the image was grainy and tree branches were blowing in front of the camera. I decided to leave the dogs downstairs and went to the guest bedroom. I was tired and wanted the weekend to be over. Before getting in bed, I opened the closet and checked it again. Nothing was inside except the clothes and boxes. I closed both sliding doors. At around 2 a.m, I woke up because someone was breathing. It was slow and uneven. At first, I thought one of the dogs had entered the room. Then I remember shutting the bedroom door. I held my breath. The sound continued. Inhale, pause, exhale. It was coming from somewhere near the foot of my bed. I reached for my phone, but it wasn't on the nightstand. I had left it charging on the dresser, several feet away. The breathing stopped. I remained completely still. Then I heard a quiet, scraping noise. It sounded like fabric moving against the closet door. I looked towards the closet. The room was dark, but a little light came through the blinds from the street lamp outside. One of the sliding doors was open by a few inches. I knew I had closed it. As I watched, the door shifted again, very slowly. Someone was moving it from the inside. My first instinct was to run. The problem was that the closet was between the bed and the bedroom door. I would have to pass directly in front of it. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then the person inside the closet whispered something. I couldn't understand the words. I grabbed the lamp from the nightstand and threw it towards the closet. The lamp struck the wall and shattered. At the same time, I jumped from the opposite side of the bed. I ran around it, pulled open the bedroom door, and rushed into the hallway. Behind me, the closet door slammed open. I heard heavy footsteps cross the bedroom. Bear and Coco started barking downstairs. I ran into Daniel's parents' bedroom and locked the door. I pushed a chair beneath the handle and called 911. While I was speaking to the dispatcher, someone moved through the hallway. The person stopped outside the bedroom. The handle turned once, then twice. I covered my mouth because I was afraid the person would hear me breathing. A man's voice said, "I'm not going to hurt you." I didn't respond. He tried the handle again. "I just need somewhere to sleep." His voice sounded calm, which frightened me even more. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way and instructed me to stay inside the room. The man remained outside for several seconds. Then I heard him walk away, a door opening downstairs, and the alarm began to sound. When police arrived, they searched the entire house and yard. They also searched the shed and the empty lot surrounding the neighborhood. They didn't find anyone. The back door was open, even though I had locked it and activated the alarm. Police believe the man escaped through it moments before they arrived. One officer examined the guest bedroom. Inside the closet, they found a dirty blanket, several empty water bottles, food wrappers, and a small backpack. There was also a pocket knife lying beneath one of the storage bins. The man hadn't entered the house that night. He had already been staying there. Police believe he was homeless and had been secretly living inside the storage shed. At some point, he found a way into the garage and began entering the house whenever the family was gone. The garage door had not malfunctioned. He had opened it from the inside. The family later discovered that a small side window in the garage didn't lock properly. The man could push it open, climb inside, and enter the house through the laundry room. I still don't know how he got into the guest bedroom closet without the dogs attacking him. The strangest possibility is that he entered while I was away Saturday afternoon. He may have been hiding inside that closet while I checked it. Maybe he stood behind the clothes while I moved the blankets and boxes. Maybe I was inches away from him. Police examined the security footage, but none of the cameras showed a clear image of his face. One recording showed a thin figure crossing the far corner of the backyard just before sunrise on Saturday. Another showed the same figure crawling through the garage window several hours before I returned. The man was never identified. He was never found. Daniel's family replaced the window, added cameras inside the garage, and began setting the alarm every time they left. But I never entered that house again. For several months afterward, I slept with my closet door open. I needed to see every corner before I could close my eyes. Even now, whenever I hear someone breathing in a quiet room, I remember lying in that bed and watching the closet door slowly move. And I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't awakened, or if the man had decided that being discovered was something he couldn't allow. Our second story was submitted by a woman named Marisol Cardenas. Marisol was raised in Roma, Texas, a small border town near the Rio Grande. Her grandparents lived outside the city in an older house surrounded by mesquite trees, cactus, and open ranch land. Growing up, Marisol heard many of the same stories told in Mexican American families throughout South Texas. Stories about La Llorona wandering near the river, mysterious owls watching from rooftops, and unseen things that called people by name after dark. Marisol never took those warnings seriously. She does now. This happened when she was 27 years old. This is her story. My grandparents had lived in the same house for almost 40 years. It wasn't a large house. It had 3 bedrooms, a narrow hallway, and a screened porch that faced the back of their property. Beyond the yard was nothing but brushland leading towards the river. The house had always made noises. The wooden floors creaked, tree branches scraped along the roof, and the old air conditioner groaned whenever it started. My grandfather used to joke that the house complained as much as he did. My grandmother, however, didn't joke about noises at night. When I was a child, she gave me 3 rules. Never whistle after sunset, never answer if someone calls your name from outside, and if you hear 3 knocks on a door or window, wait until morning before opening it. When I asked why, she said, "Not everything that calls you wants to be invited inside." I assumed those rules came from old folklore. My grandmother had grown up across the river in a small community in Tamaulipas, and she had dozens of stories about things people heard in the countryside. She never claimed to see anything herself. She simply believed certain traditions existed for a reason. Years later, my grandparents planned a trip to Monterrey to visit relatives. They were going to be gone from Thursday morning until Monday afternoon. They asked me to house sit because their dog, Chula, was elderly and became anxious in unfamiliar places. I lived about 40 minutes away, so I packed a bag and agreed to stay. Before leaving, my grandmother walked through the house with me. She showed me Chula's medication and reminded me to lock the back door at night. As she was leaving, she stopped on the porch. "If you hear the whistling," she said, "don't whistle back." I laughed because I thought she was teasing me. She didn't laugh. "Abuela, who's going to be whistling out there?" She looked towards the brush behind the house, the same thing that always does. Then she got into the car. My first night at the house was peaceful. I cooked dinner, watched television, and let Chula sleep beside me on the couch. At around 10, I took her outside. It was completely dark beyond the porch light. There were no neighboring houses behind the property and very little traffic on the road. I could hear insects, distant dogs, and the wind moving through the mesquite trees. Chula finished quickly and pulled towards the house. As I opened the door, I heard someone whistle. It came from far beyond the fence. The sound was soft and simple, 4 notes, with the last note held longer than the others. I thought it might be a ranch worker or someone walking along a nearby road. Then the same whistle came again. This time, it sounded closer. Chula began trembling. I brought her inside and locked the door. I remembered what my grandmother had said, but I still wasn't frightened. It was probably a bird or someone trying to call an animal. I turned on the porch light and looked through the window. Nothing moved in the yard, and the whistling stopped. The following morning, I inspected the fence. I didn't see footprints or any signs that someone had entered the property. The second night, things became stranger. At 1:17 in the morning, I woke to the sound of something rolling across the kitchen floor. It sounded like a marble or a small metal ball. It rolled from one side of the room to the other, slowed down, and stopped. I sat up in my grandparents' bedroom. Chula was already awake at the foot of the bed. Her head was pointing towards the open door. A few seconds passed, then the object rolled again. This time, it moved in the opposite direction. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. Chula refused to leave the bedroom, so I walked down the hallway alone. The kitchen was empty. I checked beneath the table and cabinets. There was nothing on the floor that could have made that sound. I was about to return to bed when I heard 3 light taps on the kitchen window. I froze. The window was above the sink, facing the backyard. The curtains were closed. I didn't open them. I tried convincing myself that a branch had struck the glass, but there were no trees close enough to reach the window. The taps came again, 3 times. I turned off my flashlight and walked backward into the hallway. Then someone whistled outside. The same 4 notes I had heard the night before, except now the sound came from directly beneath the kitchen window. Chula began whining from the bedroom. I locked the bedroom door and called my cousin Gabriel, who lived about 15 minutes away. He stayed on the phone with me while I explained what I heard. Gabriel laughed and told me it was probably a bird. I asked him what kind of bird tapped 3 times on a window at 1 in the morning. He didn't have an answer. He offered to drive over, but I didn't want him traveling that late. Eventually, the whistling stopped and I fell asleep with the bedroom light on. The next day, Gabriel visited. He checked beneath the house and walked around the property. He didn't find anything. He also looked at the kitchen window. There were 3 small marks on the glass, but he said that could have been dirt or insects. Before leaving, he joked that my grandparents' stories were getting into my head. That evening, I closed every curtain before sunset. I also kept Chula inside. At around 11, she walked the hallway and stared towards the guest bedroom. The room had once belonged to my mother. Now my grandparents use it as storage. Chula began growling. I had rarely heard her growl before. She was 14 years old and spent most of her time sleeping. The guest bedroom door was slightly open. From somewhere inside the room, I heard a quiet scratching sound. It moved slowly across the far wall. Then it continued along the wall behind me. Whatever caused it seemed to be traveling inside the house. I stepped away. The scratching passed through the wall towards the living room. A few seconds later, something scraped across the ceiling. I thought there might be an animal in the attic. That explanation made sense. A possum, raccoon, or large rat could make all kinds of strange noises. I called Gabriel again. He promised to come by the next morning and check the attic. After our call ended, the scratching stopped. Then I heard a woman humming. It was extremely faint. The sound came from the kitchen. The melody was one my grandmother used to hum while washing dishes. It was an old Spanish lullaby, although I never knew all the words. I walked halfway down the hall. The humming stopped. I waited. A chair moved across the kitchen floor. It made the slow, unmistakable sound of wooden legs scraping against tile. I didn't go any further. I returned to the bedroom and locked the door. Around 2 a.m, 3 knocks came from the bedroom window. The first was soft. The second was louder. The third made the glass shake. Chula crawled beneath the bed. I didn't look through the curtain. Then I heard my grandmother's voice outside. Marisol. It sounded exactly like her. Not similar. Not distant or distorted. It was my grandmother's voice, speaking from the other side of the glass. Marisol, abre la ventana. Open the window. Every part of me wanted to respond. For a moment, I forgot that my grandmother was hundreds of miles away. Then I remember her rule. Never answer if someone calls your name from outside. I remained silent. The voice called me again. Marisol. There was a long pause. Then it whispered, Mija, tengo frío. My child, I'm cold. I started crying. I texted Gabriel and told him to come immediately. I also called the sheriff's office and said someone was outside the house pretending to be my grandmother. While I waited, the voice continued moving around the house. It called my name from the bedroom window, then from the kitchen, then from the front porch. Every time, it sounded exactly the same. It never raised its voice. It never sounded angry. That almost made it worse. Chula stayed beneath the bed, shaking so violently that I could hear her collar tapping against the floor. Then the voice disappeared. For several minutes, the house was completely silent. I heard a whistle from the back of the property. 4 notes. The second whistle answered from somewhere near the front door. The 2 whistles began moving towards each other. One came from behind the house, the other came from the road. They repeated the same notes, growing closer each time. When both whistles reached the outside wall, every window in the house rattled at once. The lights flickered. Then something ran across the roof. The footsteps were too heavy to be a bird. They crossed from the front of the house to the back porch and stopped directly above my bedroom. 3 knocks sounded from the ceiling. I screamed. Immediately, the house fell silent. A deputy arrived several minutes later, followed by Gabriel. They searched the yard, the roof, the porch, and the rooms. Gabriel climbed into the attic with a flashlight. They found no person and no animal. The deputy suggested wind might have caused the windows to shake. He couldn't explain the voice, but he thought someone could have been playing a prank from outside the fence. I left with Gabriel and spent the rest of the night at his house. The following morning, we returned. In daylight, everything felt less frightening. Gabriel checked the attic again. There were no openings large enough for a raccoon to enter, and the dust between the wooden beams appeared undisturbed. We were preparing to leave when I noticed Chula standing in the kitchen. She was staring beneath the table. One of the chairs had been pulled into the center of the room. Beneath it was a trail of small drops of water. The trails began at the back door, crossed the kitchen, and ended beside the chair. The door was still locked from the inside. There hadn't been any rain. Gabriel touched the water and smelled it. He said it smelled muddy, almost like river water. Beside the chair were 3 small clumps of wet sand. There was one more thing. On the kitchen counter, we found my grandmother's wooden rosary. She normally kept it inside a box beside her bed. The chain had been stretched into a straight line. Next to it, someone or something had drawn 3 lines through the damp sand. When my grandparents returned, I told them everything. My grandfather thought an animal had gotten beneath the house, but my grandmother remained silent. She cleaned the sand from the counter and placed the rosary back inside its box. Then she asked whether I had answered the voice. I told her I hadn't. She nodded and said, "That is why it stayed outside." I asked what she believed had been calling me. She wouldn't give me a name. She only said that people near the river sometimes hear familiar voices coming from places where no person should be. Some blamed La Llorona. Others believed the voices belonged to something older, something that imitated the living because it had forgotten what its own voice sounded like. My grandparents searched the house again. Nothing was ever found. No broken locks, no open windows, no footprints around the property. But they couldn't explain the water, the river sand, or how the rosary had moved from their bedroom to the kitchen. My grandmother still lives in that house. She says the whistling returns several times a year, usually after midnight. When it happens, she closes the curtains, holds her rosary, and refuses to acknowledge it. I haven't spent another night there, but sometimes when I visit and remain until after sunset, I hear 4 faint notes coming from beyond the mesquite trees. Each time, the whistling sounds a little closer, and each time, I remember my grandmother's warning. Not everything that calls you wants to be found. Sometimes it only wants you to answer. 2 houses, 2 ordinary figures, and 2 reminders that sometimes the most terrifying place to spend the night is inside someone else's home. Mateo discovered that a locked door doesn't always mean you're alone. Sometimes the danger may have entered long before you arrived. And Marisol learned that some warnings aren't merely old superstitions. They're lessons passed down by people who survived long enough to understand one simple rule. If something calls your name from the darkness, don't answer. Thank you for joining me for another episode of tonight's broadcast, A Place for Stories. If you enjoyed tonight's story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who enjoys frightening stories inspired by the things that could be hidden just beyond our sight. Until next time, check the locks, look inside the closet, and if you hear 3 knocks at your window, wait until morning, until the shadows call again. Good night.